Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to not just another episode of the Locked On Padres podcast, but yet another crossover. It is also another episode of the Locked On Cleveland Guardians podcast. I am one of your hosts, Javier Reyes, of course, sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the host with the most. You can find me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, and I'm being joined by the legendary, who he's been hosting the pod for a while. He is a prospect guru, and he is a Cleveland guru, and occasionally even a Star Wars guru, dare I say. It is Mr. Jeff Ellis. Sir, how are you doing?
I mean, I got the X-wing there and the Darth Malgus down there. So, I'm doing well. I had totally blanked that we already had a trade between
me
these two
too.
organizations, but it feels like there's always more coming when it comes to the Guardians and the Padres.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that first. We're going to talk about the little bit of a swap that the Padres and the Guardians make, talk a little about the Guardians as a whole and what's the state of that team. And then, of course, talk about what is probably going to be the thumbnail and title of this episode, Mr. Shane Bieber, who has been on the trade block for what feels like 3 years now. But first, let's talk about just the general trade. Let's get into that first. A couple weeks ago, the Padres and the Guardians made a swap, and we've done a lot of crossovers over the years because our teams just tend to love to trade for each other. And I think that there's a bunch of reasons for that. You can go down the route of Padres aren't good at developing pitching, while the Guardians are, and the Guardians seem to not necessarily have all the offense in the world, and the Padres love getting big giant players. So they seem to be a match made in heaven for at least for those their perspectives. But Eniel De Los Santos in exchange for Scott Barlow, a minor swap. I think that the big part of this was for the Padres is that they are shedding salary right now. Yes, they need to get under 200 million. Yeah. They need to figure that out. That's why Soto's been on the trade block. I've talked about that on plenty of episodes this week. You can go check them out on the channel or wherever you get your podcasts. What was your reaction to this trade?
I think we're all like, what? Like, on a very basic level, just because it's one, Cleveland got rid of former Padre, Cal Quantrill for almost nothing. If we're being honest, like they got a 23-year-old in low A catcher who, by all counts was, the best defensive catcher there. But, it's the Rockies are weird. And for whatever reason, their development cycle didn't push a player up that they probably should have. But they got a guy who's not going to even break their top 20, probably not their top 30 prospects for Cal Quantrill. Now, Quantrill, metrics have hated him for years. He did not have a great year. He ended strong, though. But most people saw that as a money-cutting move because much like the Padres went through last year, Cleveland's the TV contract is up in the air. They're probably going to end up doing the same thing San Diego did. Cleveland did get their $55 million guaranteed last year. That's not happening this year.
Absolutely.
But after cutting Quantrill, or not cut it, well, I mean, they waived him and then traded him. Mm-hmm. Going and adding $5 million to get Scott Barlow. Now, we had heard on our show that Eniel De Los Santos was a guy who was talked about multiple times, specifically with the Cubs. The Cubs had been kind of trying to acquire him on the cheap. And it didn't come together. I did not expect Barlow. What it feels like is Cleveland traded 2-3 years of control of Eniel was signed right before the lockout. Well, not right before, like the season of the lockout. And he was a guy who could not stick with the Phillies. Cleveland worked with him and he became a solid reliever. Is he anything special? No, but is he a guy who's only making $1 million, who's reliable to be in that fifth, sixth inning role? 100%. And there's value in that. So they went for kind of the low ceiling of him versus, when Barlow was clicking, he was an amazing closer for Kansas City. He had some good moments for San Diego. It's just weird to trade for a guy who we're not used to trading for an expiring contract that makes more money in Cleveland. Those things don't happen. That's why we're going to talk Shane Bieber on the show. It's the opposite is what happens. Mm-hmm. So, my general view of it was they went for ceiling. They still hope to contend. I mean, you can look at the Twins pitching staff falling apart and seeing why they think there's a chance there. And, if it doesn't work out and if you're Cleveland, maybe you can help Barlow recapture some of his, height, like when he was at peak. And frankly, elite relief pitchers are going to net you more. Like if Barlow can get back to his near elite level, That still nets you more than someone like Enyel would at the deadline. So there's a chance where if Cleveland, it doesn't work out, but you're able to fix this guy. And typically they're pretty good at identifying pitchers that they can sometimes tweak and get more out of. And if this is a player they feel like they can do that for, they might just view this as hey, he can help us now. If it doesn't work out, we're going to elevate him and get more than we would have for Enyel.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on it, that this could be potentially a guy at the deadline. I mean, the Padres acquired Scott Barlow at the deadline. He had some stuff. He started off really strong, and then he got lit up a couple days after. I mean, this was just a mess of a season for the Padres in basically every way. But for the Padres' perspective, it's that they have to shed salary, like I mentioned at the top of this. And if you look at just the base numbers, Scott Barlow, the last 2 seasons, 1.9 F4, 3.22 ERA, 3.52 FIP. Enel de los Santos, 1.7 F4, 3.18 ERA, 3.10 FIP. Similar numbers at the base level. I'm not saying that means that they're the same or anything like that. You could dive deeper into these guys. And I think that Barlow, like you said, the ceiling is much higher. I think people might forget, like, I think it's excluding this year was one of the 5 best ERAs among relief pitchers in baseball. I could be wrong about that, but he's been very, very good before. And the Padres need to shed some relief. And like you said, the Guardians, they're a team that is always sneaky with their moves. They're very smart. And I think that I could see them netting something at the deadline. While the Padres, I think this is just simply like a win-win for both teams potentially. Yeah. And the Padres have been good at major league pitching as of late. And I think that they have to retool their bullpen. And I think this was just a solid move for them. So it's cool. I'm fine with it. Sounds like you are too.
It's nice that you got him for a few years too. Like you can just put him in, forget it. And and like the underrated aspect is like Barlow's been a closer. And we know like when it comes to relief pitchers, that brings up arbitration rates. Enyel, never a closer. He's going to always be he's never going to get anywhere near what Barlow's gotten in arbitration. So he's kind of cost controlled for 3 years as well.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy that we're here. Padres, the big spenders, the ones that have been shaking up and throwing baseball out of whack, are now trying to shed a little bit of salary. Not crazy. 200 billion is still a lot, guys. Don't worry.
It is when it's Cleveland on the other side being the team taking
it is
on
kind
salary.
It is a little crazy. Yeah, it's like very bizarre world compared to what we've been talking about previously. But obviously, that is not the main entree. That is not the main course meal of today's podcast. Firstly, before we get into Shane Bieber specifically, what is the vibe of the Cleveland Guardians? And this is important because I could be wrong, but I believe they were the division favorite heading into the year. And they have good players, but it quickly kind of seems to have nosedive, I should say, off a cliff in terms of Jose Ramirez still being a good player, having one of his down seasons. I expect him to come back because he had a down season, I believe, in 2019, and then he went nuts in 2020 or the year after, whatever it was. So I have no doubt about that. But Stephen Kwan not hitting for a lot of power. You had the Tristan McKenzie issue with him being in and out, basically being hurt for most of the year. So I'm wondering, what is the overall kind of vibe for this team and what I feel is still a very, very winnable division?
You know, it's interesting to look at the fan base because a lot of the fans fixate on the fact that like Cleveland had the least home runs in baseball by a significant margin. Like, you know, the Washington Nationals, I think, had like 30 more home runs than Cleveland. The offense was a mess and the rotation was hurt. You know, McKenzie, I think, had 11 innings, maybe it got up to 15. Bieber missed half the year. You know, before they traded Savali, he missed a month. Quantrill missed 2 months. Your fifth starter at the start of the year was Zach Plesac, who got put on waivers and nobody wanted him. No one wanted to pay that dude $2 million. No one even wanted to take a chance. But the other side of it is the big 3 young arms all really stepped up. And if you want to get really excited, the highest ceiling of their pitching prospects, the guy who has a legitimate DeGrom-esque ceiling, like this time a year ago, we were talking about a guy with 270 grade pit, like listed as the best fastball and the best slider in the minors was Daniel Espino. Now there's a ton of risk, and there always has been. And you know, I'm not saying he's going to be DeGrom. I would actually say he's not going to be DeGrom. I would definitely lean that way, just in terms of that elite, like 70 grade slider fastball combo. But Espino was hurt, and he hasn't even debuted for them yet. So they have that big 3. Still have 4 years of control with McKenzie. Maybe it's only 3, but they have essentially a cornerstone staff put together. And Joey Cantillo, speaking of Padres, I mean, we were looking through advanced data the other day, and his secondary offerings had some of the best swing and miss rates in the zone, which is an important thing because then that means that if they don't swing, it's a strike anyways, of any pitcher in AAA. Someone we knew scraped all the StatCast data and put it in a nice little document, and we were diving through all of it, trying to just look at that. And Cantillo could be the next guy up for this team. He said there's still Espino, and that's the level of excitement. They still need hitters. They flipped Savale for Manzardo, and he was great in the AFL, but the AFL is the AFL. We'll have to wait and see. It was good for guys with last names beginning with M, between Marksy and Manzardo. It was a good AFL. But there's some pitching. Hitting is just, we don't know what's going to go on. There was a lot of regression. Quan regressed, Jimenez regressed, Jose Ramirez had a down year. Right. Josh Naylor he misses a month to 2 of the year with injuries. Bo Naylor was fantastic, really started to get together. There's a lot of reasons for excitement, but then there's also like Miles Straw was bad. Cam Gallagher posted, he's not with this team anymore, but if you are like a stat nerd, like Cam Gallagher's fun to go look at because like his year was so bad. Like there's no historical precedent. Like no one has been that bad. And we say this as a team that had Austin Hedges as our starters for a few years, who was the worst hitter in baseball over a 3-year period where he was the starter in Cleveland. Yeah. But Cam Gallagher was actually worse than most pitchers have been during the last 40 years.
My God.
He put up numbers that were literally unmatched.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. It's fun. If you want to just go down a rabbit hole, Cam Gallagher's numbers from last year, and he was
worse than Ostanola. My God.
Oh yeah. He was due over $1 million in arbitration, and people were like, "Are you sure they're going to let him go?" I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're going to let the guy with the like negative 20 WAR or negative 20, not WAR. I'm sorry, runs created plus or whatever it was. He was bad.
Negative 17.
Negative 17. So it was close. It was something to watch. Not good, but it was something. Offensively, they're kind of a mess. Listen, Jose was still very good. Josh Naylor took a step forward. Bo Naylor is exciting. Andres Jimenez was average. Steve Kwan was average. I'll take average. But after that grouping, Gabby Arias, another Padre guy, can he step up? The team kind of threw him under the bus at one point this year. A lot of information leaked out about work ethic and stuff like that. And he got benched and some negative things said about Tito. Tito said, kind of relating to him. And shortstop is up in the air. First base, we're hoping Manzardo will step in. But you're excited about some parts, but the offense, talking to fans on the show and through the show, it's like that's what people are concerned about. And there's definitely a defeatist attitude in Cleveland. Like, this team doesn't spend any money. They're not going to do anything. They always fail. They're just going to be bad.
I understand. There's a lot to talk about for sure. And I think that, hey, Cleveland, they did do the Jimenez thing. In fairness, he just didn't, happen to have a good season. But I think the Guardians have a lot of interesting pieces. And I think that as trade partners for Bieber, there's a lot to get into. But before we get into that, folks, I just want to take a second to talk about our good friends over at FanDuel. At the time of us recording this, the Seahawks and the Cowboys are playing apparently the game of the year. And if you picked, well, at the time of this recording, we don't know who's winning, but if you picked let's say Cowboys are ahead right now. If you picked them, guess what? If you had listened to our offer here for FanDuel, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So if you bet the money line on the Cowboys, you are swimming in the dough. That's what you're doing. You're swimming. You're not just jumping, you're swimming in it. It's very fantastic over there. That's $150 if your team wins. But it's not just money line bets. They've got you covered with everything else. Spreads, player props, over-unders, over-under, I don't know, whatever catches for one of your favorite receivers. Amari Cooper, since we're talking Cleveland, maybe you want to bet the over on him this week. I don't know who the heck the Browns are playing at the moment, but whatever, you could do that. They have you covered. So guys, go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off your NFL season of betting. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. We are back now. All right. So there was a lot that you talked about with the Guardians. And I think that, first of all, you guys do have a great name theory player. I just want to give my outside perspective. And the name theory is, of course, just guys who have sick names. Xavion Curry. being one of them. Just an incredible name. I don't know if he's very good. I've just heard, and I've actually heard of him before this. And Enel Santos was also a name theory guy, so I'm excited about that. You also have Ramon Laureano, who, do you remember when Ramon Laureano was like the top, like, not top, but it's like him and Brian Reynolds, I feel like, have been talked about in trade rumors so much. And Laureano had the suspension that I feel like kind of like killed all of that. I don't know how he was exactly for the team, but when I look at your team, it's interesting because the Padres, for Shane Bieber, I imagine that they'd be willing to trade at least one of their pitching prospects. It seems like there's two right now between Robbie Snelling and Dylan Lesko. I don't think they want to give up Snelling. He seems to be a lot more further along. Preferably, I don't know if they want to give up any, but I don't know if pitching prospects is what Cleveland would be going for right now. Although I could be wrong, but it seems like pitching is, it seems like the injuries. I mean, that's what you were saying. Like McKenzie barely pitches this year, right? Like they had some bad luck on that front. Do you think that they'd be looking for pitching prospects or offensive guys before we start getting into this?
I think offensive guys. I think pitching depth, which I know is not the Padres' strong suit right now.
No,
but like I feel like they probably want some depth because if you trade Bieber and then Xavier Curry is probably your fifth starter, and he was okay in that role. A little overexposed. It's probably he's best as like a swing man, more of a like he did really well in that kind of long role. In the pen, Hunter Gaddis is their next guy up, and it hasn't gone great for him. Cantillo could be the guy sooner rather than later, but yeah, there's I don't know who the depth option would be, but they're in a situation where it feels like they kind of need another play. I mean, they signed Jaime Barrea the other day to a minor league deal to maybe help with that depth. But it just gets really shaky after kind of that initial, the three rookies in McKenzie. And like I said, Curry is probably your fifth, Gaddis your sixth. And then your guess is as good as mine at that point.
Yeah. And this is a trade that hasn't been like rumored. We just think that it's a fun thought experiment. And frankly, I don't know exactly if Bieber has been himself. Even it doesn't feel like there's been too much traction of late. It seems like Dylan Cease is the name of the week right now. That's been tossed around a lot, which I think it should be because I think the White Sox should be rebuilding. I don't know why they're keeping Luis Robert or Dylan Cease right now. Their team seems like it's a mess. But what is kind of the over? Let's just talk about Bieber really quickly. Do you think that he is a guy that is likely to be moved, or do you think that this is just people saying, "Oh, team that had bad record"? Therefore, they're going to try and trade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a degree of like Cleveland always sells, so they're probably going to sell. Yeah. They don't have, like I said, great depth right now in that rotation, and they have graduated most of their guys. Espino missed all last year with injury and probably won't be back till midseason, so they don't have a ton of great options. I think they'll listen, but it's Bieber is a weird pitcher. It's like Juan Soto is going to get 30 million plus in arbitration because he's been great every single year. Bieber is in his last year and he's at 12 because he's had weird up and downs. And 2 of the last 3 years, he missed half the season with injury. And this is a guy who at peak, his number 2 pitch was his curveball. And since his injury, he's been afraid to throw it. And it's very like, is there something wrong there? Is there a bigger, like he's never had surgery with these big injuries. He's avoided that. But that curveball was his out pitch, and now he doesn't. It went from being something he was throwing like 28, 29% of the time. Last year it was at 14. And it's not quite the same break and everything that pitch was. So he's had a big velocity drop from that 2020 campaign. I never heard him tied to the sticky stuff, but people are going to discuss that whenever a pitcher has it's more of but that's typically more of like a rotations per minute drop than a velocity drop. So there's a lot of weird stuff with him, and it makes the threading the needle kind of difficult because Cleveland doesn't traditionally like to sell low, but he is a player making, I believe $12 million is the estimate, and is going to be a free agent. I think it's interesting from the other perspective too, of like, it used to be a big deal to trade someone like Shane Bieber in the offseason because you could get a draft pick back. But depending on the team that acquires him, if the Padres were to trade for him in season or before the season began, they would net like what, a 4th rounder if he walked. Like the draft pick, draft pick values aren't, it used to always be everyone gets a first. Now it's not that way anymore since. So I mean, yeah, you want to net a pitcher earlier to get more starts out of him, but it's not kind of as valuable to get a guy in the offseason as opposed to in season. And as we saw with Jordan Montgomery, good pitchers will net good prospects. The Cardinals got 2 very good prospects in that deal. So I think Cleveland can make a trade. I don't know if they're actively seeking one. It can happen. Knowing people in and around that system, I can say very quickly, I know one prospect that was held in high regard was Graham Pauley, the outfielder, in his draft year.
Yeah.
That's
our mutual friend Arm Layton is very high on him too.
Is he? Yeah. No, I can say that I know some people that were extremely high on Graham Pauley in particular, and I don't know. You don't know how much is. You hear a lot. So, I don't want to sit here and make it sound like I'm hearing something directly from anyone on any piece, but I'm like, I know there are those who have had ties to that organization that certainly put him at a high value. And I think that's what's kind of interesting with the Padres in general is maybe they get viewed as the system's a little down, but I think sometimes people look at it through the wrong lens of like guys like Pauly and Mark C are probably more valuable than, and I'm probably saying his name wrong, than they're perceived because of how much prospect rankings are reactionary. So the Padres still have a lot of talent and a lot of pieces where a trade could conceivably happen. It just gets weird if you're trying to figure out the major league side of it, like how Cleveland can benefit their team now.
Yeah. And I personally think that the Padres have replenished their farm really, really well. And I say that also in the context of how many trades they've made. I'm not saying that this is a top elite tier system, but considering that this team has done nothing but trades and traded Wood, Gore, Abrams, Susana, like all those guys just like a year and a half ago for Juan Soto, the fact that you have like your Merrills and you have Ethan Salas and then you have Snelling and Dylan Lesko and Graham Pauley as a sleeper. And then there's even some fun ones like Homer Bush. Like there's a lot of like fun pieces here, which means that I think that they're likely to, or at least it's possible for them to make a move. From my perspective, I think Bieber makes more sense as a midseason one because then they're just back at square one. Because he could just walk. And since they have their financial issues right now, I don't know if that would make the most sense. And like you said, it's not like Bieber's been blowing people away lately. There has been concerns, like you've mentioned, with the revolutions per minute, a little bit of velocity stuff, the swings and misses. I remember when there was a time when I swear I just would check the game log and it's like 2 strikeouts, did 3 straight starts. Yeah, you know what I mean? And that was concerning because if you just, he set a record, really?
Well, he set a record for the most games in a row with 8 strikeouts or more of any Cleveland pitcher in the history. And this is a franchise that's been around a long time.
Yeah.
And then this year he struck out eight hitters in like 2 games. Like he couldn't strike anyone out.
Yeah. And if you just were to look at it from the kind of the peripheral stuff and whatnot, strikeout rate has gone down basically every year, not basically, literally every year since 2020. Granted, 2020 was an outlier, but it was an outlier for everybody. So 41%, then 33.1, 25%, and now 20%. So this is the type of guy that I think the Padres would rather say, maybe let's see if we're good first. You know what I mean? Like if we're good and halfway through the season, we might not even have to give up as much. Then let's say things are going right. Bogarts is back. Machado is back to his MVP form, and Tatis is back to his MVP form. You get some of those depth guys that you get in the offseason potentially. I'm going to assume that Soto isn't here at this time. Maybe you got some good players in return, and you're just a solid team. I think it makes more sense then, because if you would be giving up prospects now, I just don't. I just think that they'd be back at square one, because if they gave up any of their pitching guys, it's like, why would you do that? You have weird concerns with your pitching. You're probably going to you're most definitely likely going to lose the guy who just won the Cy Young. Then you've got issues with Darvish's health. And then you've got Musgrove, who's great. And then you have these 2 prospects you're excited about. And, you can work some things. I personally wouldn't even mind taking a flyer on Frankie Montas these days, right? So I'm okay with it, but I just think, I don't know if it's a match at the moment. I think that there are other guys they'd be interested in. And frankly, I don't think that they're wild about the idea of just being in the same situation that they are right now, where they have not a lot of rotation depth and they don't have a lot of money to go out and replenish that because of all the contracts that they gave out. That's the negative of that whole thing. Although it would be fun. Let me tell you, it would be fun. And I also think Preller is a lot of, he doesn't tend to, he really likes buying high. You know what I mean? Like Bieber's a little bit on the down right now. And I'm not saying he can't turn it around. I'm like, I don't know enough about the guys in terms of the mechanics as you do and others do. Like, yeah, maybe he comes back in this year and that strikeout rate is back up to 28% or whatever the heck. And everyone's like, oh, cool. Like he's figuring out, he's a really talented pitcher. But he doesn't usually go for guys when they're not pitching very well. You know what I mean? Like this is a guy who traded for Soto, traded for Darvish after Darvish was a Cy Young candidate, right? Trade for Blake Snell after that World Series thing, right? Like it doesn't seem like that's been his go-to, especially for players of this caliber. So I don't think that this would happen.
Is Grisham the only guy to sell low? Like, because that was after he bombed, after he made that critical error. I was like trying to think of a case. Like,
I mean,
that's the only guy I can think of.
You can argue the little mini trades they made at the deadline with what's his face, with Garrett Cooper and G-Man Choi and Scott Barlow, frankly. You did, because he was really off this past year. So maybe him, but like Grisham, yeah, that's kind of the only one. Adam Frazier, he bought super high on. That wasn't a great trade. Yeah, I mean, I can't really see Xander Bogaerts if we're talking about signings, but in general, this just doesn't seem like I think that he'd be more interested in going to deal with the Brewers again, who seem to be on the route of fire sale. Maybe, I can't tell, because every time someone tells me a team's going to have a fire sale, it almost never happens, except for the Cubs that a couple years ago. It was like the one team that really did do it. But
yeah, and the Nationals, it feels like the fans of our show are always like, hey, why can't this team trade for a power hitting outfielder? And it's like,
yeah,
specifically right. And we literally like did the FanGraphs list, and there's like 20 right-handed outfielders who had, or less than 20, who had 20 home runs last year. And it's like, the problem right now more than anything else is not just that the league is kind of changing and shifting, but it's like, there's like 5 teams that are not competing next year, right? Like there's going to be 25 teams out of the gate that think they have some degree of a shot, and it just limits availability. But I agree with you. It feels like Cleveland, like I said, the whole thing with Bieber is, as a Guardians fan, I've gone so back and forth and over this. It's like, do you hold on to him and see if he rebounds, or do you sell now before you get not like? There's an outcome where he is an absolute stud at the end of the year and gets a massive contract. There's an outcome where they don't even offer him the qualifying offer. Like he could be anywhere in between, and he could be perfectly healthy and not get the qualifying offer. I'm not even talking injuries. I'm just saying he could have if he pitches how he pitched at the start of last year. He was Kyle Gibson last year for about the first 2 months, and that's, I mean, Kyle Gibson just got what, $12 million. I mean, that's fine, but you're not trading a lot for him. So, you know, I do get a lot of people like, hey, what would a trade look like for the Guardians with Bieber? And it's like, it's hard to figure out, because I don't know how teams view him. And
he's hard. I don't know what people think of him either. Yeah,
and especially after the injuries, like a lot of injuries of late.
Yeah, that's what I meant by injuries. Like, is this guy about to go the route of like? I mean, this is like a Tim Lincecum, where it's like everyone was talking about him for years, and then this first name that pops in my head, or Lucas Giolito, who's I think it's finally turned, but like that guy was, in my opinion, past like couple years, like past 2 years, a little bit more name brands over real value, and then you saw what happened on the Angels this year, where his first start, he's getting absolutely torched. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen for Bieber, but I think you're right. And I think that there's just too much uncertainty with him as a pitcher, that the type of team that trades for him is a team that's like, all right, you know what? We're kind of set up right now. Let's take a flyer on this guy as someone who could be our 3 or 4, and we'll feel really great about it. And there's like high potential there, like an Atlanta Braves or something like that, where they'd be like, I mean, I don't know if they have the personnel to be able to trade for him like that. It's just such a weird player, and I can't get over like this. It's just odd, and I think that Cleveland is probably in a weird spot to trade him too. Not to mention, I still think the division's really winnable. So
yeah, it's
like,
I
don't think that
division.
It's a really weird division. So it's like the White Sox. Look at it. It's got him. Yeah. It's got Jeff. He's like, oh my god.
The White Sox. I mean,
the White Sox are a disaster.
The Royals are a nonstop dumpster fire from the moment they won the World Series.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
it's just Minnesota, right?
Yeah, it's like, it's great. The Tigers added Kenta Maeda, but if they lose Eduardo Rodriguez, then they've taken a step back. And
exactly.
I really like a lot of the young players, honestly, in Detroit. They're the team that's kind of most fun to watch.
So bad for Detroit. Come on.
Yeah, I mean,
Detroit sports needs a W. I know they got the Lions. I get it. But like, the Tigers have been rebuilding since the Justin Upton contract. You know what I mean? Like, I don't remember. Like, they've been rebuilding for a
since
long
Mike
time.
Ilitch passed. Like when the owner who was, he's like, oh, I'm a billionaire and I'm dying. I'm gonna spend every dime I got to try to win. Yeah. And then when his son took over, it hasn't been quite the same. But I mean, the Twins, like, let's just be honest. There's no way you can replace Sonny Gray. Like, that's no matter what they say internally, that's an irreplaceable type of dude. And they're up against this is kind of where it's bad for baseball, right? Like, it's a bad division, and the teams know it's a bad division, so there's no incentive to try because we can squeak by with a kind of cruddy. That's
what the Brewers have been doing for years. Yeah,
and it's like if we stay kind of cruddy, we don't have to spend as much. And like, listen, I love the Diamondback story this year, but let's be honest, the Diamondbacks had 2 starters.
Yeah,
we've never seen a bullpen game in the World Series before. So it's like we see this stuff happen all the time. It's like you can slide through. The one time Cleveland almost won the World Series in recent memory is the year that half their pitching staff got hurt in August and they had no business making it to the World Series. So this division de-incentivizes competition right now, unfortunately, and Cleveland should have a shot at it. I mean, 2 years ago they had good health. Last year they had terrible health.
You're right though. That's such a great point. Like, Milwaukee has been doing this for a while, and I think Milwaukee's a pretty good team, but they've been really leeching off the fact that they basically for the past few years have only had to worry about the Cardinals. This year they didn't have to worry about anybody, and then they still didn't do too much, and now they're having a fire sale because they don't want to pay Corbin Burns an extra 200 or 740K. Like, that's where we're at, where it's like it's both central divisions too, and I think that with their team, in fairness, they had the Puerto Rican king. Maybe that's part of why they were able to make the World Series, in my very unbiased opinion. That had a big impact on it. But yeah, man, I think that the Guardians are one of the weirdest teams to read. It feels like they never make the move, or not. How do I put this? It feels like they don't telegraph the move quite so much. The Giants, for Padres fans, they're a little bit similar. They don't usually telegraph. It usually kind of just happens. So I feel like we won't hear, the John Heyman, Jeff Passan updates. And for all those reasons, do I think the Padres give up prospects? Sure. I think they could throw out, I don't know, like a Samuel Zavala, and maybe an Adam Mazur, an Iriarte, someone of that caliber. I don't think they're trading, Jackson Merrill for this guy, right? But no. I think that they could maybe dip into the farm a little bit. I bet you it's one of those, hey, Cleveland, are you really down on this guy? Because the thing that would make sense for the Padres is the only way for them to really keep their rotation good is through trades. They're not going to be able to sign one of these top guys. Everyone keeps talking about Yamamoto. The Yankees are in on him. Y'all ain't outbidding the Yankees right now. I'm sorry. Or, frankly, the Dodgers. That team has been quiet, a little bit too quiet, by the way, and they need pitching desperately. So I just don't think they're going to be able to get a guy that's like $10 million a year that's going to be really good for them. So Shane Bieber, in theory, would make sense. But because of the fact that you don't know exactly what you're getting from him, that he's a free agent after this year, Dylan Cease, I think, is the player that would make a lot more sense for them to be like, all right, maybe we'll give up a Snelling. Do I want to do that necessarily? I don't know. I have it. I can't make up my mind. I'm kind of down with just being like, you know what? We have Bogarts, we have Tatis, we've got Machado, got Darvish, Musgrove, got some star players. We have enough. You have the amount of star players that teams that win the World Series usually have. I'm a believer in you need them to go get over the hump. Anybody can have that Diamondback season. We see it all the time. But I want to have the guy who hits the game-tying home run in Game 1. That's Corey Seager, and they spent for that guy. So I think the Padres have those dudes. So anyone listening from the Padres perspective, even if they don't make one of those giant moves, I'm okay with taking some pot shots. Maybe Snelling comes up and is pretty effective. Heck, maybe they could get something on Matt Waldron. I don't know. And you just take low-end shots. You get a decent return for Soto. And I'm willing to go with that because you already have the stars. If they didn't have any of these guys, I'd be like, what are we doing? Let's go. Like, just extend Soto or trade for or sign Cody Bellinger. I'd be for it. But since they have all those guys and because of the payroll, don't think that this is a perfect match, man. I don't think it is. But at the deadline, maybe, because Preller likes getting crazy at the deadline. Say Shane Bieber's doing all right, and if the Padres are good, I think that's the better route to take for a guy like Bieber, is a wait and see. And then if you even if it means you have to pay up a little bit more at the deadline, hey, if you're good, you're good. They still have a lot of high paid players on this team, so they're clearly a team that is built for potentially winning now. So that's my kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah, and the cautionary tale of it is, last time Cleveland had an injured asset on an expiring contract who everyone thought they got ripped off by trading away their ace was Corey Kluber to the Rangers for Emmanuel Clase.
Oh, I forgot about that. It was for Class A.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
It was Emmanuel Clase and Delano DeShields Jr., which I said at the time, I go, I think this is a salary dump. I mean, he played the whole year in center field, so maybe it wasn't. Yeah. But yeah, it was, not the same situation because Kluber's highs were higher and he had a freak injury and it was kind of that random.
Yeah.
But the last time they were in this similar situation, if you want a cautionary tale of a team where like that went really bad, that was the Clase deal.
Yeah, and didn't Kluber, wasn't it his first start too, I think?
With Texas,
the Rangers,
I mean. He threw one inning.
Yeah, he threw one. Okay, I remember this. Inning. Yeah, that was like, man, that was rough. So, I mean, that stuff just happens sometimes. Yeah. But, hey, we'll have to see. I'm sure that one of our teams will make a move this offseason. Our team will make a move. You heard it here first, everybody. The Guardians will make a move, and same thing for the Padres, especially the Padres, I imagine. It sounds like the Soto deal is gonna happen at some point. So
the Soto deal is gonna be fascinating when it happens in Cleveland. We're getting ready for the draft lotto. Like we haven't had a top 10 pick since Clint Frazier. Like we had the run under Tito went really well until his final year, and we have not picked higher than I think 12th. Will Benson was the previous high. Like this team has been competitive for a long time. So growing up in Cleveland, sports have been awful almost my entire life, and drafts are like national holidays. So we're already gearing up for that. We'll be prepared and ready for that. But yeah, that's probably our big move because unless we decide to chase this year's version of Josh Bell and Mike Zunino after seeing how well those have turned out every single year.
Bell really just hated y'all. Like he got traded and said, "See ya, I'm gonna become." The Predator. I mean, he was just insane. Like when he got there,
his wife is from Cleveland. You would have thought that, like, oh, he's close to home, and nope. Maybe it's too close to home. I don't know. Maybe he didn't like his in-laws or something.
I thought that was going to be such a slam dunk, like classic Cleveland. All these teams getting these big free agents, and they're going to come in for Josh Bell, and he's going to be just as good as Jose Abreu. Now. He might have been. He might have been. That's the funny part. But it's just like everyone's talking about the big deals, and Cleveland's like, we're gonna get this guy over here that we think is good. And for some reason, it didn't work, and I was shocked by that. But nonetheless, Jeff, what do you have that you'd like to plug for the people that you got coming up on your show, or any final thoughts?
We'll be covering all the angles with the Guardians. I'll throw it out there. I do occasional draft content at Prospects Live, as well as I do like a MLBDraftNow.blogspot.com. I've got a way too early mock. It's not the most active thing, but if you want additional content, I do some stuff there. And then Locked On Guardians, if you want Guardians talk, you can go listen to the Scott Barlow episode if you want more on NL. One of the few pitchers in baseball who's thrown an immaculate inning.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And if you guys want to check me out, again, that's at Javipeno on Twitter, JAVIIPENO. I've been inconsistent with my writing, but of course, going to be doing Locked On Padres stuff, going to be talking about whatever. I mean, I think that the Soto deal will be happening somewhat, maybe possibly soon. I mean, winter meetings are next week. We'll see what happens. So going to be talking about all that stuff. And if you want my writing, you can find it at Just Baseball. I recently did a feature on the internet game Blaseball for people who might be familiar with it. I know Jeff is.
I liked it. I read it. I never knew about it until it was over, and then it made me mad that I'd somehow missed this thing that was perfect for me. I was like, I'm mad. I tweeted.
I was sad too.
I was like, I'm mad at Javi. I never even got to try this thing, and it looks awesome. So I highly recommend that article. Even if you never played it. Like I said, I never played it, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, everybody go check that out. It's pinned to my Twitter profile, so you'll find it there. I talked with the studio and everything. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's basically it. Until next time, my Fire Faithful homies and my gallivanting Guardians people. I do this at every podcast. I try to do the double letter thing for every team. Until next time, everybody, take care.